I've produced close to 70 albums so far. Of that percentage, maybe 2/3 are about space-related subjects or time travel or science. That's why we're here, I think. My family, like many other families in my neighborhood, were pretty much with a lot of kids, and so we would all play together. We would all kind of grow up together, and music was always something that was a link that kind of linked us between our classmates, our neighbors, our relatives. You don't really choose it, really. You don't decide to be in music. It was always there. Again, you kind of had this support system in the city of Detroit where everybody's interested in music. So a turntable is something that maybe if you don't have, your neighbor has, or if someone else has, and you just borrow it, or you go and play around with it. I started using a turntable maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, which wasn't that uncommon. I mean, hip hop was, spreading across the country, and the idea to have a turntable and a mixer and to do tricks with it was a trend, and at the time it was quite common, especially in Detroit, that a gathering would be organized by one or two kids or a group of kids, and maybe a thousand kids would show up. By the age we were 16, 17 years old, you would rent a location and bring the sound system, and by the time you're 21 years old, you're pretty experienced at what dance music is, the social gathering, how things work in that type of setting.
What is a DJ if you can't scratch? What is?
So I was doing a residency in a club on the east side of Detroit called UBQ, and was informed that at the time of my set, it would be a live broadcast, and it would be broadcast all over the city, all over the area. Maybe about 4.1 million people would be listening to this broadcast. So it happened, and I did the best I could, and then I got a call the next day saying if I wanted to come into the radio station to talk about a radio show, and there was another DJ there, and he was also called too. And so it was kind of like an audition that I didn't know anything about. So they said, okay, you got 15 minutes. Show us what you can do. So in 15 minutes, I kind of meticulously took apart things by hand and made a different mix. And so after that, they said, okay, you got the job. The other guy, thank you very much. But this guy ended up going to the opposite station, and we became competitors for many, many years.
Who dares disturb the mighty wizard?
All right, let's get back to business.
The radio station was very nervous about the live radio broadcast, and they were nervous that in the process of me scratching the needle, I would break a needle. And so what they did, they decided to give me a third turntable in the event that if I break one, I'll have another one to go to, and I can still continue the mix. Luckily, I didn't break so many needles on the air, but eventually I started using the third turntable regularly, and that's how I started to kind of master that type of technique. By that time, I had worked for a radio station for about 5 or 6 years, and so I was pretty much a celebrity in the city of Detroit, and had a syndicated show around the country. I would make a show, and it would be sent to Los Angeles, to Texas, to Atlanta, and I had pretty good income to be quite young. So I had literally built a studio inside in my apartment, and it was there where I would produce the shows and would buy more equipment and tape machines and synthesizers and drum machines and basically everything that I needed to for music. And so eventually it grew into a studio, and there is where I started to begin to get to compose music, and Final Cut album was made there. Final Cut was really an industrial band that's connected to groups like Ministry and Throbbing Gristle and Front 242 and Nitzerev. And so Underground Resistance was kind of, all these influences kind of made up the unit,
Live and direct from Detroit! Come on, usher it up! Pump it up! Let's go!
I had lots of recording equipment, but not as many synthesizers as I wanted to have. So I knew a guy that lived across town. His name was Mike Banks. We had met before. So I would call him up and ask him if I could borrow some synths. So he would bring them over. And when he came over, he would listen to the music that Tony Schrock and I were making, the final cut. And he would, Mike would stick around for a little bit and listen to it, and we would talk, and so I would use his synths and then call him back. He would come pick them up, so that's kind of how we kind of met. Our plan was to recreate what it meant to be a musician in the music industry. And we wanted the music to be the most important thing. So some of it might have came from that, the fact that we were anonymous and, we wanted to kind of keep a distance and put the message on, the music. We were doing vocal house, we were doing other types of music, and I thought, since we have so much equipment, so much, we have so much ability to make music, let's make more experimental. Let's make a concept project. And I told him, on a flight to Rome, we were going to Rome. And while I was half asleep, I came up with this idea that it would be interesting to make an album about the rings of Saturn. And so we went to Rome, we did New Year's Eve gig. We came back in early January, and I went to the library, got as many books as I could about the planet, studied as much as I could, and then made some calculations as to how we might be able to translate this into music and sound. And then I presented it to Mike and to Rob and said, okay, so this is Saturn. This is how we're going to connect the rings to the vinyl and the spiraling of the disc. And that was really the first project that I'd made where we're trying to translate something scientifically. I had eventually moved to New York from Detroit and was doing a residency at the Limelight in Midtown Manhattan. And part of my deal to move to New York was that I was still in UR at the time. I told them if I leave Detroit and I move to New York, I need to have an office and I need to have an apartment, and you guys need to pay for everything. I need to have free telephone, free everything, because I still run a label and I need to have another office. So they said, okay, yeah, we give you everything that you want, just come here. So when I moved to New York, I had everything to run a label. And so things didn't quite work out with UR, and I decided, okay, so I'm in New York, I got all this stuff, I got all these resources, I'm gonna start a new label. And that was how I started Axis. When I started Axis, I was very much in contact with Robert Hood. We hired him at UR as an intern to help out, stamping boxes and things. And he wanted to make music, so Mike and we began to show him how to make music. And when I left UR, we kept in contact, and I asked him if he wanted to release music on the label. And that worked for a little while, and then eventually I decided that in order to be able to be consistent with the style of music, it only needs one artist, and I would make all the music for the label. So I never really signed artists because I didn't want the sound of the label to change after Robert left. When I moved to New York, it was so different from Detroit. I started making music for what I needed to have in that type of setting. Same thing happened for Berlin. When I would go to the Tresor and I would play music, I could see what I needed to have. So I would go home, make it, bring it back, play it, see if it worked, and that's what led to Waveform Transmission 1. And so there's where minimal techno actually comes from. So the idea of breaking the music down so that it's so simple, so that a good DJ technician would be able to piece things together and put it back together again in the way that he wanted to do it was the attraction. Not to just put the needle on it and let it play, but actually use it as a tool was the idea. Even in a more extreme way, I wanted to have a collection of discs that only I had. So I had begun to make music only for me. And I got up to something like maybe 30 discs, I think. And I began to play it, and The Bells was one of the tracks that I would play. And DJs would ask me if they could get a copy of that. but I had the only copy. So eventually I thought maybe I should start a label with this style of music that I was making for myself, and that eventually led to it being Purpose Maker. If you make music enough and you spend enough time, eventually you will wander into making music differently because you just want variety, you just want to do it in a different way, you just want to explore more with music. So by the year 2000, I was about ready, to try new things, and I thought maybe we should begin to start to see what techno looks like. And so I got interested in more film, and that's what led to Metropolis, Fritz Lang, first soundtrack. And then working with Cinematex to create soundtracks for more films, and that led to performances and then classical performances. It came around I think around 1997. I was thinking that someone should work with an orchestra. I mean, there's a lot of great music, a lot of great compositions in electronic music. Someone should try to work with an orchestra, and so I began trying around 2001, 2002, and we got to the point of the first rehearsal, and it was a disaster. The musicians were not interested. The conductor wasn't interested. I didn't really know how we were going to gel these two sounds together, And then some people in France heard of what I was trying to do, and they contacted me and said, listen, we heard what you were trying to do there. We think we have an orchestra that maybe might be interested, and we can introduce you to a conductor, and maybe we can piece these things together. And so that's how it started. And I met with an arranger, and we translated the music with Thomas Roussel, and then we took the idea to a conductor and the orchestra, and then we pieced it. It was in south of France and at the Pont de Garde, and it was a holiday weekend, a free festival, which about 10,000 people showed, and they were a bit nervous about the performance and how the people would react to it, so they were trying to convince me to DJ afterwards. And I told them no, because if I DJ, then no one will remember the concert. So I said, no, I don't want to do it. So we did it. The performance was good, was great, and I think I decided to DJ just a little bit to say thank you to the audience for being so patient. But we captured it, and then we ended up making a DVD of it, and that kind of started the career of performing with the orchestra. It's easy to say it's a very long career, but it's a career of many different levels, and so I literally could sit here for 72 hours speaking about the connections. But the thing that I'm most proud of is that I chose music rather than going to school and being an architect or having to answer to someone, basically. I think that if I were not interested in this subject, I would not have arrived at 70 albums. I think that if I was just making music for people to dance to, I think I would have gotten tired around maybe 30th and maybe chose to do something else. But I think that because there's so many things to explore, I would imagine I'm middle age, maybe I'm halfway, so maybe 150 albums, maybe in the next 20 or 30 years would be feasible. And I, look forward to, as discoveries happen in space and space science, and we learn more about ourselves, it gives me more reason to be able to produce music and create albums and projects.